And I don't think either of those two could have been able to cope. They'd been anywhere else. And that was the only good thing that happened, was that they were there. And they had that structure, they had people around them.
No one imagined that everything would unravel because of a plain, anonymous envelope. It slipped into the palace mailroom on a quiet morning, blending in with the routine flow of documents. Yet the moment Princess Anne picked it up, a strange unease tightened in her chest. The seal wasn't British, and the handwriting stirred a memory she couldn't place. She didn't know it yet, but opening that envelope would redirect the course of her life. What lay inside wasn't just information. It was a shock waiting to detonate, carrying the final secret Diana never had the chance to speak aloud. Before we dive into what this discovery means for the monarchy, make sure you're subscribed so you stay updated. The envelope that shattered the quiet. It began on an ordinary gray morning inside the palace. Papers had piled into a single overwhelming stack, and the constant stream of decisions had numbed me. But that one envelope stood out. It rested on my desk like it didn't belong there. No crest, no royal marking, only a deep red wax seal that seemed almost bold in its confidence. For a moment, I nearly passed it to my secretary, slipping into the safety of routine. But something tugged at me, a faint whisper of recognition I couldn't explain. My fingers hovered over the seal, and my pulse kicked up in my throat, as if my body sensed danger before my mind did. When I finally cracked it open, a single sheet of paper slid out. The heading struck first, Private Laboratory Analysis. Then my eyes caught the next line, DNA test results. I skimmed down the page, stopping on a name that rooted me to the floor. Diana Spencer. Beneath it, another name, one I had never heard before, foreign and unexpected. But the last line knocked the air out of me. A confirmed match. A strong genetic link. No speculation. No rumor. A scientific fact staring back at me. A chill swept through me so sharply I felt lightheaded. The world I kept meticulously organized, the schedules, the protocols, the traditions, suddenly seemed fragile, like a glass structure already cracking. My hands shook as I read the words again, searching for some hint of error, a misprint, anything. But the ink was calm and certain, revealing a truth far heavier than any tabloid headline or whispered rumor. This wasn't scandal. This was lineage. Blood. Legacy. Who had sent this to me? Why now? And what kind of storm would it unleash on the royal family? The very idea of inheritance, the rules we've lived by for generations, felt as if they were shifting under my feet. My mind flashed back to Diana during those quiet family moments. Her soft tones, the way her eyes sometimes drifted somewhere distant. Moments others wrote off as exhaustion or pressure. Had she been trying to leave breadcrumbs for me to find? My chest tightened, and each breath felt thin. We'd always trusted in clear, documented lines. Who came from whom, who carried which duty, who inherited what role. And now, with one slip of paper, those lines were blurred in a way none of us had prepared for. Everything shifted in an instant. This wasn't rumor or palace chatter. It was a crisis that could reshape the very bones of the monarchy. I folded the document with trembling hands and slid it into my desk drawer, locking it with a click that echoed far too loudly. But even as the key turned, I knew the lock meant nothing. A line had been crossed, and nothing could return to what it was. The palace felt different. Still quiet, but not peaceful. More like the halls were holding their breath, sensing something dangerous had crept in. I glanced out the window at the perfectly manicured gardens, their calm beauty almost mocking. None of it mattered compared to the storm tightening inside my chest. I've always been the one who fixes things, the reliable one who carries whatever weight is handed to me. But this was bigger than duty, bigger than protocol. It was a fracture, small but growing, like a crack spreading through stone. And I didn't yet realize the worst part. This was only the first tremor. The past was pushing up from the ground, and the secrets Diana left behind were ready to surface. Diana's clues, whispers from a woman the world thought it understood. Diana had worn many crowns in her lifetime. Adored royal, global icon, fiercely protective mother. But behind the scenes, she was far more insightful than people gave her credit for. She planted hints where almost no one bothered to look, long before that tragic night in Paris shifted the world's attention. She must have believed someone someday would need those pieces. Now, with the lab report weighing down his desk, those scattered clues snapped into focus, like a lock finally finding its key. The past wasn't buried after all. It had simply been biding its time, and felt a jolt rush through her as she reread the document. But beneath the shock, her mind, sharp, disciplined, logical, began functioning like a machine. Connections she had once dismissed as Diana's dramatic moods suddenly made chilling sense. Moments that seemed strange back then now felt deliberate, carefully placed, part of a map and hadn't known existed. Those private diaries Diana wrote, the ones everyone assumed were emotional outbursts, took on a different light. Lines she once brushed off, truth too sharp for daylight, now felt like warnings. Diana hadn't been exaggerating. She had been encoding messages. And remembered how Diana held those journals, fingers curled around the leather as if it were a shield. She had read out sections softly, always emphasizing that some things needed to be kept safe until the right moment, and had nodded at the time, unaware of the gravity behind those words. Now she could see it clearly. The diary wasn't just her outlet, it was a map. Then came the memory of the letters tucked away at Althorpe, hidden far from royal eyes. Not the sensational letters outsiders whispered about, but the quiet ones, filled with painful truths that went beyond affairs or political maneuvering. One note, slipped into a letter for her son, resurfaced in Anne's mind with force. When they're ready, it will make sense. And had once believed Diana meant William and Harry, a mother's hope that her boys would someday understand her choices. But with the DNA report burning through her thoughts, the message expanded. Maybe they wasn't limited to her sons. Maybe it meant anyone brave enough to follow the trail the monarchy tried to suppress. And also remembered their rare private talks, the ones held where courtiers couldn't hover. Diana would mention the machine with a cold, steady anger, and assumed she meant the media, which had devoured her life. But there had been something in her eyes, something that suggested a wider enemy. It wasn't just the tabloids. It was the entire structure propping up the throne, hiding truths to protect a polished image. Diana had fought that machine, and in the end, it had worn her down. As memories swirled, and recalled a thin folder she once found at Althorpe, tucked behind a stack of crates, Diana's handwriting was scrawled across the cover. Back then, and barely skimmed it, it looked like notes and random scribbles. But one word at the top stood out, bold and unmistakable. Child. She'd dismissed it years ago. Now it felt like the clearest signal of all. Diana had left more than hints. She had left a trail, waiting for someone to finally follow it. See, and felt the pieces falling into place, slowly but unmistakably. None of this was accidental. Diana had woven meaning into every quiet sentence she ever shared, every guarded look, every strange pause. She hadn't been dramatic. She'd been surviving. She'd been leaving a trail for someone she hoped would eventually understand. A tight knot formed in Anne's throat as it hit her. That someone was her. She was the one holding the thread now. The missing name, the buried link, the bloodline tucked away in sealed rooms no one spoke about. The more she uncovered, the more disoriented she felt, like she'd stepped into a labyrinth someone else designed. Nothing should have fit together this neatly, and that alone made it terrifying. What frightened her most wasn't whether Diana had hidden something, but who had helped her, or worse, who had tried to erase it. Throughout Diana's life, and remembered hearing flashes of forgotten names. People Diana only mentioned when no one else could hear. Names that, if brought into the light, could shake the monarchy from the inside. And stared again at the lab report, feeling as though the page itself sneered at her. Diana's DNA aligned with a pair of initials buried deep in the fine print. J.K., a set of letters tied to a shadowy corner of their family history. She slid the paper across to her most trusted aide. Find out who this belongs to. All of it. Don't stop. Days later, the aide returned, face pale, voice unsteady. Missing files. Altered dates. Entire chunks of history cut out like someone had taken scissors to the timeline. And then the final blow. A tiny clinic outside the country had stored records of a birth that appeared nowhere in royal archives. The date matched perfectly with a period Diana claimed to be abroad for charity. a trip that now looked less like goodwill and more like camouflage. The doctor tied to those records had once served in the palace, and had left abruptly, without explanation. When and connected Diana's mysterious absences to this concealed birth, the old whispers about a spare heir no longer felt like idle gossip. They felt like a truth someone had gone to great lengths to bury. A chill crept down her spine. She didn't yet have proof, but everything inside her screamed that powerful hands had shaped the silence. And now those hands had faces. Charles's confession, and the pact that erased Diana's truth. Years ago, and had seen something in Charles she could never name. A strange mixture of resignation and authority, like a man living beside a secret instead of above it. But now, with the lab results lying between them, that facade finally cracked. He sat alone in his study, swallowed by the shadows of the room, as if the past itself were looming over his shoulders, and placed the report on his desk, expecting anger, denial, anything. But he simply looked at it, and nodded, defeated. No shock, no confusion, just recognition, the kind that comes from living with a ghost for years. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. She waited for him to defend himself, to provide any explanation. But his silence told her everything. He had carried this truth quietly, choosing secrecy over honesty. When their eyes met, his were unguarded, tired, raw, stripped of royal distance. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "And why bury it?" She laid everything on the table. The child, the deception, the destroyed records. Charles didn't flinch. "It's real," he said. "All of it. We hid the rest to survive." He spoke about the decisions made in the aftermath of Diana's death, describing them as necessary, not malicious. Evidence was sealed away, names were erased, and a child vanished from history. All in the name of protecting the institution. To him, it was a policy decision. And it was unforgivable. Her anger rose like heat under her skin. "You chose the crown over her truth," she said, voice shaking. Charles stared down at the carpet, avoiding her eyes, as if he'd rehearsed this moment countless times. Finally, he whispered, "Duty takes things from you that you can never justify. And the world outside these walls, they'd never understand." The crown had made brutal choices, and saw that truth clearly now. She looked at her brother, a man she barely recognized, protecting a lie that had poisoned everything around them. He'd carried the truth for years while letting Diana's final warnings fade into dust, only to resurface now with devastating force. Camilla's leverage, the quiet queen who built her power on secrets. If Charles had been tangled in something dangerous, and knew Camilla wouldn't be far behind. Camilla thrived during royal crises, moving with a calmness that felt rehearsed, always collecting information, always watching. The influence she held didn't come from titles. It came from the secrets she stored, especially those tied to Diana. After Charles's confession, and tracked Camilla down in a small side room. She placed the evidence in front of her. The DNA match, the records, the inconsistencies. Most people would have panicked. Camilla didn't even flinch. A small, unsettling smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. She admitted she'd known bits of the truth for years, gathering fragments here and there. She never flaunted her knowledge. She stockpiled it. While others stumbled through scandals, Camilla quietly strengthened her position, guarding truths that could destroy a kingdom. Anne's anger rose. Camilla wasn't protecting Diana's memory. She was using it as currency. But and felt boxed in. Camilla reminded her that the monarchy wasn't a fairy tale. It was fragile, full of traps. "You cling to ideals," Camilla murmured. "Ideal with the danger." The words hit like a slap. And then, almost casually, Camilla added, "The boy is much closer than you realize." A cold wave rushed through Anne. Camilla had seized control of the narrative without raising her voice. As Anne walked away, those words repeated in her mind. "Closer than you think," echoing like a warning. The living storm. Diana's lost son steps out of the shadows. He had grown up at the edges of the world, watching from a distance as strangers argued about his mother's legacy. Now, the whispers about him were drifting back toward the palace that had erased him, and followed the trail Diana left behind. Old letters, worn pages, messages scribbled in haste, until she finally saw a face. Blue eyes, sharp but wounded. Eyes that reminded her instantly of Diana. After confronting Camilla, Anne's instincts sharpened. Something out there was alive, a heartbeat, a truth that couldn't stay hidden. She called in trusted archivists, people untouched by palace politics. They dug through forgotten files until they found something startling, a name so ordinary it barely registered, yet connected to the secret clinic's records. A child born far from royal view. The palace had tried to erase him, but the gaps in the story were too obvious, and sifted through photos, each one showing features unmistakably Diana's. The defiant tilt of the chin, the expressive eyes. He had Diana's fire, more like